In the vastness of space, there were countless stars, planets, and civilizations. Humanity had joined this cosmic community many years ago, but it was still considered young compared to others. Among the many alien races humanity encountered, one stood out as particularly mysterious: the Veilith. No one really understood them, not even the oldest and wisest species in the galaxy. For decades, attempts were made to communicate with the Veilith, but they always ended in failure. Slowly, one by one, all the other races gave up. They called the Veilith too strange, too dangerous, or simply not worth the trouble. But humanity didn't give up. Not yet. Sarah Mitchell sat at her desk aboard the research vessel SS Horizon, staring at a screen filled with data about the Veilith. She was a linguist, someone who studied languages, and she had spent years trying to understand the sounds and symbols associated with the alien race. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her eyes reflected both determination and exhaustion. She knew most people thought her work was pointless, but she couldn't stop. Something deep inside told her that the Veilith weren't as unreachable as everyone believed. Across the room, Daniel Carter leaned over his own workstation. He was a biologist, fascinated by life forms unlike anything on Earth. His glasses rested low on his nose as he scrolled through images of the Veilith. Their insect-like bodies were tall and slender, covered in a shimmering exoskeleton that seemed almost metallic. Daniel found them fascinating, though he admitted they looked intimidating. Still, he agreed with Sarah. They deserved another chance. The two of them had been working together for months, preparing for what might be humanity's final attempt to make contact. The United Earth Council had approved their mission reluctantly, swayed only because Sarah and Daniel had argued passionately for it. Even then, the Council made it clear: if this mission failed, funding would be cut, and humanity would officially abandon the Veilith like everyone else. Captain Robert Hayes entered the room, breaking the silence. He was a tall man with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "We're approaching the coordinates," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Are you two ready?" Sarah nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Captain. We've done everything we can to prepare," Daniel added. "If there's any chance of figuring them out, this is it," Hayes sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I hope you're right. Most of the crew thinks this is a waste of time and resources. If we don't get results..." He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. The SS Horizon slowed as it reached its destination, a remote corner of the galaxy where the Veilith's homeworld floated in orbit around a dying star. From the ship's windows, the planet looked bleak and unwelcoming. Its surface was scarred with massive craters and jagged mountains, remnants of ancient battles or natural disasters. Thick clouds of toxic gas swirled across the landscape, making it hard to see much detail. As the crew gathered in the main observation deck, tension filled the air. Many of them wore expressions of doubt or outright fear. One crew member, Rachel Bennett, voiced what most were thinking. "Why are we even here?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Every other race has already written them off. Why should we risk our lives for something that probably won't work?" "It's not about taking risks," Sarah replied, turning to face her. "It's about doing the right thing. These creatures may seem alien to us, but they're still living beings. What if they're suffering? What if they need help and no one else will give it to them?" Rachel frowned but didn't argue further. She glanced at Daniel, who offered a small shrug. "She's got a point," he said quietly. Captain Hayes stepped forward, addressing the group. "Listen up. I know some of you aren't happy about this mission, but orders are orders. We'll do our job, follow protocol, and stay safe. That's all I ask." His tone softened slightly as he looked at Sarah and Daniel. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll find something worth finding." With that, the preparations began. Sarah reviewed her notes on the Veilith's known behaviors, while Daniel double-checked the equipment they planned to bring down to the surface. Rachel, despite her earlier skepticism, ensured the security team was ready for any potential threats. Everyone had a role to play, whether they believed in the mission or not. Hours later, the landing party stood in the airlock, waiting for the outer door to open. Sarah adjusted the straps on her suit, feeling a mix herself. Excitement and nervousness, bubbling inside her. Beside her, Daniel held a scanner, his fingers tapping impatiently against its surface. Rachel stood nearby, her weapon holstered but within easy reach. Finally, the door opened, revealing the harsh, desolate terrain of the Valith's world. The ground was rocky and uneven, littered with debris from whatever catastrophe had ravaged the planet. A cold wind whipped around them, carrying traces of the toxic gases above. It was a place that felt utterly devoid of life or hope. Yet Sarah refused to let that discourage her. As she took her first step onto the alien soil, she whispered to herself, "We're here, let's show them we haven't given up." Document. Part 2 of Everyone Gave Up on the Alien Race Except Humanity. The surface of the Valith's homeworld was as bleak and unwelcoming as it had appeared from orbit. The sky above was a swirling mix of dark clouds and toxic gases, casting an eerie orange glow over the barren landscape. Rocks and debris littered the ground, some jagged and sharp, others worn smooth by time and weather. It was a place that seemed frozen in destruction, as if it had been abandoned after a great calamity. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her helmet, checking the air filters one last time. She glanced at Daniel Carter, who was scanning the area with his handheld device. Behind them, Rachel Bennett stood alert, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The rest of the team spread out slightly, each focusing on their tasks. Despite the advanced technology they carried, none of them felt truly prepared for what lay ahead. "This place gives me the creeps," Rachel muttered into her communicator. Her voice crackled faintly through the speakers in everyone's helmets. "Feels like we're walking into a graveyard." "It might be," Daniel replied, his tone thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Look at these ruins, they're everywhere." He pointed to the remains of what looked like buildings or structures half buried in the dirt. Some were little more than crumbling walls, while others retained hints of intricate designs etched into their surfaces. Sarah knelt beside one of the larger pieces of debris, brushing away dust with gloved hands. She traced her fingers over strange symbols carved into the stone-like material. They weren't random scratches, they formed patterns, almost like writing. Her heart raced as she snapped photos with her wrist-mounted camera. These could be clues to understanding the Valith's language. "We need to document everything," Sarah said, standing up. "Every symbol, every structure. This is our best chance to learn something about them." Daniel nodded, already jotting down notes on his scanner. "Agreed, but we should stay cautious. We don't know how stable this area is, or if the Valith are still here." Rachel tightened her grip on her weapon. "If they are, I hope they're friendlier than their reputation suggests." As the group moved deeper into the ruins, the terrain became rougher. Cracks split the ground, some wide enough to swallow a person whole. The air grew heavier, pressing against their suits despite the life support systems keeping them safe. Still, they pressed on, driven by curiosity and determination. It wasn't long before they found evidence of underground structures. A massive, hole-in-the-ground revealed stairs leading downward, disappearing into darkness. The edges of the opening were smooth, suggesting it had been deliberately constructed rather than formed naturally. Lights attached to their helmets illuminated the way as they descended carefully, step by step. The staircase ended in a corridor made of the same material as the ruins above. The walls were covered in more symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. Sarah paused to examine them closely, her excitement growing. "This is incredible," she whispered. "These markings, they're too precise to be decorative. They must mean something." "Maybe directions?" Daniel suggested, pointing to arrows etched near the floor. "Or warnings." Rachel frowned, glancing nervously at the shadows ahead. "Let's not find out the hard way." They continued along the corridor, which eventually opened into a vast chamber. The space was filled with towering machines, their shapes alien and unfamiliar. Some hummed softly, emitting low vibrations that resonated through the floor. Others lay silent, covered in layers of dust and grime. In the center of the room stood a large console, its surface adorned with buttons, levers, and screens. all dark and unresponsive. "This is unbelievable," Daniel breathed, his voice filled with awe. "Their technology is far beyond anything we've seen. Even broken, it's breathtaking." Sarah approached the console cautiously, running her hand over its surface. "Do you think we can reactivate it?" "Maybe," Daniel replied, pulling out a portable diagnostic tool. "But we'll need time, and probably help from the ship." Before they could discuss further, a sudden tremor shook the chamber. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and cracks began forming in the walls. Rachel raised her weapon instinctively, shouting, "We need to get out of here now." "No," Sarah protested, grabbing Daniel's arm. "Not yet. We have to take samples. There's no time," Rachel interrupted, gesturing toward the widening fissures. "If this place collapses, we're dead." Reluctantly, Sarah nodded, and the three of them hurried back toward the staircase. As they climbed, the shaking intensified, forcing them to cling to the railing to avoid falling. By the time they reached the surface, they were breathless and covered in dust, but alive. Back outside, the wind howled louder than before, carrying bits of ash and grit. The team regrouped near their shuttle, checking their equipment to ensure nothing critical had been left behind. Sarah looked back at the ruins, frustration evident in her expression. "We barely scratched the surface," she said bitterly. "There's so much more to discover, and so much danger," Rachel added, her tone firm. "You saw what happened down there. One wrong move and we'd be buried alive." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We'll come back. Next time we'll bring reinforcements and better tools. For now, let's focus on analyzing what we've got." Captain Hayes greeted them as they boarded the shuttle, his face lined with worry. "Report," he ordered, his voice clipped. Sarah summarized their findings quickly, emphasizing the importance of returning to the underground complex. "We can't give up, Captain, not when we're so close." Hayes sighed, rubbing his temples. "I understand your enthusiasm, but safety comes first. We'll review the data and plan another approach, but only if Command approves." As the shuttle lifted off, Sarah stared out the window at the desolate planet below. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial, something that might change everything. Somewhere beneath those ruins, answers waited, and Sarah was determined to find them, even if it meant risking her life to do so. End of document. Document. Part 3 of Everyone Gave Up on the Alien Race Except Humanity. The second trip to the Valith's underground complex was more organized but no less tense. The team had spent hours reviewing data from their first expedition, planning every detail to minimize risks. They brought extra equipment, reinforced tools, and backup plans for nearly every scenario they could imagine. Still, the weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air. No one knew what awaited them below, or if the Valith would even appear again. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her helmet as she stepped off the shuttle, her boots crunching against the rocky surface. She glanced at Daniel Carter, who carried a new, scanning device designed to interface with alien technology. Behind them, Rachel Bennett led the security detail, her weapon ready but not raised. The rest of the crew followed silently, their faces a mix of focus and unease. "Let's stick together this time," Rachel said firmly into her communicator. "No wandering off." Sarah nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead to the chamber they'd discovered during their last visit. She couldn't wait to see it again, to uncover its secrets. Whatever lay beneath the ruins held answers, not just about the Valith, but about why they had been abandoned by the rest of the galaxy. The group moved quickly toward the entrance of the underground structure, descending the same staircase they had used before. This time, however, they noticed something different. The glowing symbols on the walls seemed brighter, pulsing faintly as if responding to their presence. Sarah paused to examine them, her heart skipping a beat when one of the markings shifted slightly under her touch. "Did you see that?" she asked, pointing at the symbol. Daniel leaned closer, his scanner humming softly. "It's reacting to us somehow. Maybe our suits, or maybe—" He trailed off, his eyes widening. "Maybe the Valith are watching." Rachel tightened her grip on her weapon. "Great. Just what we needed. They continued down the corridor until they reached the massive chamber. Inside, the towering machines loomed as eerily silent as before, but there was a new energy in the air, a sense that they weren't alone. As Sarah approached the central console, she heard a soft clicking sound coming from the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat as dark shapes began emerging from the darkness. The Veilith appeared slowly, their insectoid forms gliding gracefully despite their size. Their exoskeletons shimmered faintly in the dim light, reflecting hints of green and blue. Large, multifaceted eyes studied the humans intently, unreadable yet undeniably curious. None of them made any aggressive moves. Instead, they simply stood there, observing. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was palpable, but Sarah forced herself to take a step forward, raising her hands in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. She spoke slowly and clearly through her suit's external speakers. "We mean no harm. We've come to learn." The Veilith didn't respond immediately. Instead, they tilted their heads in unison, as if considering her words. Then one of them stepped forward, a taller individual with intricate patterns etched into its exoskeleton. It emitted a series of clicks and hums, its body language calm but deliberate. Sarah froze, unsure how to react. But then she remembered the recording she had studied back on the ship. Mimicking the sounds as best she could, she responded with a few hesitant clicks of her own. To her astonishment, the Veilith repeated her attempt, its tone softer this time. "They're communicating," Daniel exclaimed, his voice trembling with excitement. "This is incredible." Rachel kept her weapon trained on the aliens, though. She lowered it slightly. "Don't get too comfortable," she warned. "Just because they're talking doesn't mean they're friendly." Sarah ignored the cautionary note in Rachel's voice, focusing instead on the exchange. She tried, another series of clicks accompanied by gestures pointing at the console. The lead Veilith watched her closely, then turned to the others. After a brief pause, several of the creatures moved toward the machines, activating them with precise movements. Lights flickered to life across the chamber, illuminating panels and screens that had remained dormant during their previous visit. Symbols scrolled rapidly across the displays, too fast for Sarah to decipher. Daniel rushed to set up his scanner, connecting it to the nearest panel. "If I can sync with their system, we might be able to translate some of this," he said, typing furiously. As the team worked, the Veilith stayed close, their presence both comforting and unnerving. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were testing her, gauging whether humanity was worthy of trust. She focused on maintaining eye contact with the lead Veilith, hoping to convey sincerity. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the chamber, startling everyone. Red warning lights flashed overhead and the ground trembled violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling and cracks began spreading along the walls. Daniel shouted, "Radiation spike, we have to leave. Now." Rachel grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her away from the console. "Move! Everyone out!" Reluctantly, Sarah allowed herself to be dragged toward the exit, casting one last glance at the Veilith. To her surprise, they didn't follow. Instead, they gathered around the machines, working frantically to stabilize whatever systems were failing. It was as if they understood the danger and were determined to protect their home, even at great risk to themselves. The journey back to the surface was chaotic, with debris falling all around them. By the time they reached the shuttle, they were covered in dirt and sweat, their breathing labored inside their helmets. Captain Hayes greeted them anxiously, demanding a report as soon as they boarded. "It's collapsing," Daniel explained, between gasps. The radiation levels spiked and the entire complex started destabilizing. "And the Veilith?" Hayes asked, his voice sharp. "They stayed behind," Sarah replied quietly. "They're trying to fix it." Hayes frowned, clearly troubled. "That complicates things. If they're willing to risk their lives to save their world, maybe we underestimated them." Sarah nodded, staring out the window at the planet below. Despite the chaos, she felt a spark of hope. For the first time, the Veilith hadn't treated them as intruders or threats. They had communicated, however briefly. And in that moment, Sarah realized something important. The Valith weren't giving up on their world, just like humanity wasn't giving up on them. End of document. Document. Part 5 of Everyone Gave Up on the Alien Race Except Humanity. The third trip to the Valith's homeworld was different from the others. This time, the team wasn't just exploring, they had a mission. Armed with new insights into the Valith's language and technology, they were determined to make progress. The shuttle landed near the same entrance to the underground complex, but the mood among the crew was more focused, almost electric. Everyone knew what was at stake. Sarah Mitchell stepped off the shuttle first, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape. The ground was still covered in debris, and the wind carried a faint metallic tang that made her suit's filters work harder. She glanced at Daniel Carter, who was double-checking the equipment they'd brought along. Behind them, Rachel Bennett led the security detail, her weapon ready but relaxed at her side. The rest of the team followed, each carrying tools and supplies designed to interface with alien technology. "We stick to the plan," Captain Hayes reminded them over the communicator. His voice was calm, but firm. "No unnecessary risks." Sarah nodded even though he couldn't see her through the helmet. "Understood, Captain. Let's move." The group descended into the underground structure, their path lit by the glowing symbols on the walls. Sarah noticed that the symbols seemed brighter than before, pulsing rhythmically as if guiding them forward. She pointed this out to Daniel, who adjusted his scanner to analyze the patterns. "They're responding to us again," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Maybe they know we're coming back." Rachel frowned, keeping a close eye on the shadows ahead. "Or maybe they're setting a trap. Stay sharp." As they reached the massive chamber, they found it eerily quiet. The machines stood silent, their screens dark. But something felt different this time. The air was charged, as if the Valith were waiting for them to act. Sarah approached the central console, running her gloved hand over its surface. It was cold to the touch, but she could feel a faint vibration beneath her fingers. "Let's try connecting our systems," she suggested, turning to Emily Dawson, who had accompanied them this time. Emily knelt beside the console, pulling out cables and adapters. Her hands moved quickly as she linked the alien device to their portable translator. "It's working," Emily said after a few moments, her eyes glued to her screen. "The symbols are syncing with our database. We might be able to communicate directly." While Emily worked, Sarah turned her attention to the Valith. They hadn't appeared yet, but she could sense their presence nearby. She raised her hands, slowly, mimicking the gestures she'd used during their last encounter. Then, using the sounds they'd partially decoded, she spoke softly into her suit's external speaker. "We've come to help." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the Valith emerged from the shadows. Their insectoid forms glided silently toward the humans, their multifaceted eyes reflecting curiosity rather than hostility. The lead Valith, the same tall individual with intricate patterns on its exoskeleton, stepped forward, emitting a series of clicks and hums. Sarah listened carefully, recognizing some of the sounds from their earlier recordings. With Emily's help, she responded hesitantly, piecing together fragments of their language. To her relief, the Valith seemed to understand. They gestured toward the console, inviting the humans to follow. "This is it," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "They're letting us in." The team moved deeper into the complex, guided by the Valith. The corridors were wider here, leading to a massive chamber unlike anything they'd seen before. In the center of the room stood an enormous device, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed in sync with the symbols on the walls. The structure looked ancient but functional, humming softly as if alive. "What is this thing?" Rachel asked, her voice filled with awe. Daniel approached cautiously, his scanner humming as he analyzed the device. "It's some kind of communication array, or maybe something more. Look at the energy readings. This thing is powerful." Sarah studied the runes, comparing them to the data Emily had translated. "I think it's a beacon," she said finally. "A way to send a signal across the galaxy." "A distress signal?" Rachel guessed. "Exactly," Sarah replied. They've been trying to call for help, but no one's been listening. Emily nodded, typing furiously on her laptop. If we can reactivate it, we might be able to amplify their message. Maybe even reach species who ignored them before. The Valith watched silently as the humans worked. Their expressions unreadable. Sarah couldn't tell if they understood what the team was doing, but she hoped they trusted her enough to let them try. Time was running out, not just for the Valith, but for their world. Radiation levels were rising steadily, and the tremors they'd experienced during their last visit were growing stronger. "We need to hurry," Daniel warned, checking his instruments. "The structural integrity of this place isn't stable. If we don't fix the beacon soon, the whole complex could collapse." Rachel tightened her grip on her weapon, glancing nervously at the ceiling. "And take us with it." Despite the danger, the team pressed on. Emily interfaced their equipment with the beacon, while Daniel and Sarah worked to stabilize the power flow. The Valith assisted where they could, their movements precise and deliberate. For the first time, Sarah felt a real connection with them, a shared purpose that transcended language barriers. Finally, after hours of intense effort, the beacon roared to life. Its runes blazed brightly, casting a warm glow across the chamber. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floor and walls. Sarah stepped back, watching in amazement as the signal propagated outward, reaching far beyond the dying star. "It's working," Emily said, her voice filled with disbelief. "The message is being broadcast across the galaxy." But their celebration was short-lived. As the beacon activated, the ground shook violently, throwing everyone off balance. Cracks spread across the ceiling, and chunks of rock began falling around them. Dust filled the air, making it hard to see or breathe. "We have to go," Rachel shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Now!" Reluctantly, the team began retreating toward the exit. The Valith stayed behind, gathering around the beacon to protect it. Sarah hesitated, torn between leaving and staying to help. But Daniel pulled her away, his voice urgent. "We can't do any more here. Trust them, they know what they're doing." As they raced up the stairs, the tremors grew worse. By the time they reached the surface, the entire structure was collapsing behind them. The shuttle waited nearby, its engines already warming up. Captain Hayes greeted them anxiously, helping them aboard as debris rained down around them. Once safely inside, Sarah collapsed into a seat, her heart pounding. She stared out the window at the ruins below, wondering if the Valith had survived. Despite the chaos, she felt a flicker of hope. The beacon was active now, sending out a cry for help that couldn't be ignored. Somewhere out there, someone would hear it. And maybe, just maybe, they would answer. Back aboard the SS Horizon, the crew gathered in the main observation deck, watching as the beacon's signal spread across the stars. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep them going. Humanity hadn't given up on the Valith, and neither had the Valith given up on themselves. End of document. Document. Part 6 of Everyone Gave Up on the Alien Race Except Humanity. The beacon's signal spread across the galaxy like ripples in a vast cosmic ocean. It carried a simple yet powerful message. We need help. Back aboard the SS Horizon. The crew watched as their instruments tracked the signal's progress. Data streamed in from distant star systems, showing that the message had reached dozens of civilizations. Some ignored it entirely, dismissing it as irrelevant or unworthy of attention. Others expressed cautious interest but made no promises to act. But then slowly, responses began trickling in. Sarah Mitchell sat in the ship's communications room, her eyes glued to the screen as incoming messages scrolled by. Each one was carefully analyzed by Emily Dawson, who worked tirelessly to translate alien languages and decipher intentions. At first, the replies were few and far between, a handful of species expressing sympathy but offering little more than words. Then, something unexpected happened. A small group of planets, mostly minor powers within the galactic community, announced they would send aid to the Valith. "They're actually coming," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. She turned to Captain Hayes, who stood nearby, arms crossed. "This is it, Captain. We've done it." Hayes nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "Don't celebrate too soon. Getting them here is only half the battle. We still have to coordinate efforts, figure out what kind of help they'll provide, and whether the Veilith will accept it." Daniel Carter joined them, holding a tablet, filled with data about the Veilith's biology and environment. "It won't be easy," he admitted. "Their world is dying, and their bodies are breaking down at a genetic level. Even if we stabilize the atmosphere, they'll need medical intervention to recover fully." Rachel Bennett leaned against the wall, listening quietly. Her skepticism had softened over time, replaced by a grudging respect for the mission. "So, what's next?" she asked. "Do we wait for reinforcements? Or do we go back down there?" "We go back," Sarah said without hesitation. "The Veilith risked everything to activate that beacon. They deserve to know they haven't been forgotten." Hayes agreed, though he reminded everyone to stay vigilant. "Prepare another landing, but this time bring extra supplies and keep your guard up. We don't know how the Veilith will react when they see us again." The shuttle descended toward the surface once more, its engines roaring against the toxic winds. The team disembarked cautiously, their boots crunching against the rocky terrain. The underground complex was eerily silent now, its entrance partially blocked by fallen debris. As they approached, Sarah noticed faint glimmers of light emanating from within. The beacon was still active, though barely visible through the dust and rubble. "We need to clear a path," Rachel said, gesturing to the security team. Together they worked to shift the larger chunks of rock, creating enough space to enter the structure. Inside, the air was thick with ash, and the walls bore fresh scars from the collapse. The Veilith were nowhere to be seen. "Where are they?" Daniel wondered aloud, his voice echoing softly in the empty corridors. "They must have retreated deeper into the complex," Sarah guessed. "Let's follow the light." The group moved carefully, guided by the faint glow of the beacon. As they ventured further, they found signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dust, tools left behind, and glowing symbols that pulsed faintly as if acknowledging their presence. Finally, they reached the main chamber where the beacon stood tall and proud, its runes shimmering brightly despite the destruction around it. And there, gathered in silence, were the Veilith. The aliens turned to face the humans, their large eyes reflecting curiosity mixed with exhaustion. Their exoskeletons were duller than before, marred by cracks and scratches. Some leaned heavily on one another, clearly weakened by their ordeal. Yet they stood together, united in purpose. Sarah stepped forward, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. Using the fragments of their language she'd learned, she spoke softly. "Help is coming. You're not alone anymore." The lead Veilith tilted its head, studying her intently. After a moment, it emitted a series of clicks and hums, its tone softer than before. Emily translated quickly, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "It says, 'Thank you.'" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes behind her helmet. For months, she had dreamed of this moment. A breakthrough, a connection, proof that humanity's efforts hadn't been in vain. Now, standing face to face with the Veilith, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. But there was still work to be done. The team set up temporary equipment to monitor radiation levels and assess structural damage. Daniel collected new biological samples, hoping to refine their understanding of the Veilith's genetic condition. Meanwhile, Rachel coordinated with the security detail to ensure the area remained safe. As the hours passed, the first ships began arriving. They were smaller vessels, representing the planets that had pledged support. Their crews disembarked cautiously, carrying medical supplies, environmental stabilizers, and advanced technology designed to repair ecosystems. Among them were scientists, engineers, and diplomats eager to assist. At first, the Veilith seemed wary of the newcomers. They clustered together, watching silently as the visitors set up camp near the beacon. But Sarah stayed close, acting as a bridge between the two groups. With Emily's help, she continued translating basic phrases, explaining the purpose of each piece of equipment and reassuring the Veilith that no harm was intended. Slowly, trust began to form. The Valith allowed the outsiders to examine their machines and even offered guidance on how to operate them. In return, the visiting teams shared food, medicine, and other resources. It was a fragile alliance, built on mutual desperation, but it was a start. Captain Hayes observed the scene from a distance, his expression thoughtful. He approached Sarah later that evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ruins. "You were right," he said simply. "This was worth it." Sarah smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the Valith. They just needed someone to believe in them, someone to listen. Hayes nodded. "And now, thanks to you, they've got an entire galaxy paying attention." Despite the progress, challenges remained. The Valith's homeworld was still dangerously unstable, and repairing it would take years, if not decades, of sustained effort. Many questions lingered about their history, their culture, and the catastrophe that had brought them to this point. But for the first time, there was hope. Hope that the Valith could rebuild their civilization. Hope that humanity had proven itself capable of compassion and perseverance. And hope that, together, they could create a future worth fighting for. The days turned into weeks. The SS Horizon remained stationed near the planet, overseeing operations and coordinating with the growing number of volunteers. Sarah spent most of her time working alongside the Valith, learning more about their language and customs. Each interaction deepened her admiration for their resilience and determination. One evening, as she stood beneath the dying star's dim light, she looked up at the sky. Ships continued to arrive, their lights twinkling like stars against the darkness. Somewhere out there, countless beings had chosen to care, to reach out, to help, to make a difference. And in doing so, they had reignited a spark of hope, not just for the Valith, but for all those willing to believe in second chances. End of document. Document. Part 4 of Everyone Gave Up on the Alien Race Except Humanity. Back aboard the SS Horizon, the mood was a mix of exhaustion and excitement. The team had narrowly escaped the collapsing underground complex, but their brief encounter with the Valith had left them buzzing with questions. Sarah Mitchell sat in the ship's lab, staring at recordings of the alien clicks and hums she had captured during the mission. Her mind raced as she replayed the sounds over and over, searching for patterns or meaning. Daniel Carter worked beside her, analyzing biological samples he'd collected from the ruins. His scanner displayed images of microscopic structures that were unlike anything found on Earth, or anywhere else for that matter. "Their biology is strange," he said, adjusting his glasses. "These cells show signs of extreme stress, like they've been exposed to high levels of radiation for a long time." Sarah paused her recording to glance at him. "Radiation? That explains why their world is so toxic now. But how did it get this bad?" "It's not natural," Daniel replied. "This kind of damage doesn't happen overnight. Something catastrophic must have happened here. Maybe war, maybe an accident. Whatever it was, it pushed them to the brink." Rachel Bennett entered the lab, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed. "So what you're saying is, these aliens are dying?" "Not just dying," Daniel corrected. "Their entire species might be on the verge of extinction. Their DNA is breaking down, and unless we find a way to help them, they won't survive much longer." Sarah felt a pang of sadness at his words. She had always believed the Valith deserved another chance, but now she realized just how dire their situation truly was. "We can't give up," she said firmly. "If we can decode their language and understand their technology, maybe we can figure out how to help." Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "You make it sound easy, but even if we crack their language, repairing their planet isn't exactly a weekend project. We don't have the resources or the authority to do something like that." "That's where Emily comes in," Sarah said, turning to look at Emily Dawson, the ship's tech specialist. Emily was hunched over a workstation, typing furiously, as lines of code scrolled across her screen. She glanced up when she heard her name. "I'm working on it," Emily replied, pushing a strand of blonde hair out of her face. I've synced our systems with some of the data Daniel brought back. If I can map their symbols to our alphabet, we might be able to translate their messages. And fast, Sarah added. The sooner we understand them, the better. Captain. Robert Hayes joined the group a short while later, his expression grim. Command wants an update, he said, looking at each of them in turn. They're not happy about the risks we're taking. If we don't show progress soon, they'll pull the plug on this mission. We're close, Sarah insisted. The Valith tried to communicate with us. That's more than anyone else has ever achieved. If we can prove there's a real chance of helping them, maybe Command will reconsider. Hayes nodded slowly. All right. Keep me posted. But remember, we're walking a fine line here. One wrong move and this whole thing falls apart. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly. Sarah spent hours poring over recordings, piecing together fragments of the Valith's language. With Emily's help, she began identifying recurring patterns in the clicks and hums. Some seemed to correspond to specific actions, like pointing or gesturing, while others appeared to represent emotions or concepts. It was slow going, but progress was being made. Meanwhile, Daniel focused on understanding the biological samples. He discovered that the Valith's genetic damage wasn't limited to individuals. It affected their ability to reproduce. Without intervention, their population would continue to decline until there were none left. It's like their species is stuck in a death spiral, he explained during one of their meetings. Even if we fix the environment, they'll still need medical assistance to recover. Rachel listened quietly, her skepticism softening as the evidence mounted. If we can't save them, no one will, she admitted reluctantly. But how do we convince Command to invest in something this big? They'll say it's too risky, too expensive. We appeal to humanity's values, Sarah said. We remind them why we're out here in the first place, to explore, to connect, to help. If we walk away now, we're no better than everyone else who gave up on the Valith. Hayes agreed, though he remained cautious. I'll draft a report for Command highlighting your findings, but we'll need more than theories. We'll need proof. Something concrete that shows we're making headway. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing footage from the underground chamber, Sarah noticed something she had missed before. One of the glowing symbols on the walls had changed after the Valith activated the machines. At first glance, it looked like random flickering, but upon closer inspection, she realized it formed a repeating sequence. Emily, Sarah called, waving her over. Look at this. Do you think this could be part of their language? Emily studied the footage carefully. It's possible. Let me run it through the translator. She tapped a few keys, and moments later, a string of characters appeared on her screen. It's incomplete, but I think I've got something. It translates roughly to help or aid. Sarah's eyes widened. They're asking for help. The realization hit everyone at once. The Valith weren't hostile or indifferent. They were desperate. They had reached out to other civilizations only to be ignored or rejected. Now humanity was their last hope. This changes everything, Hayes said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Prepare another landing, we're going back, and this time we're bringing reinforcements. As the crew geared up for their next descent, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Valith's plea for help had ignited a spark within her, a reminder of why she had dedicated her life to understanding alien cultures. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew one thing for certain. Humanity couldn't turn its back on those who needed it most. The shuttle descended toward the Valith's homeworld once again, the surface glowing faintly, under the light of its dying star. This time, however, the team carried more than curiosity. They carried hope. Hope that they could bridge the gap between two vastly different species. Hope that they could undo centuries of neglect. And hope that together they could build a future worth fighting for. End of document. Document. Part 7 of Everyone Gave Up on the Alien Race Except Humanity. The days turned into weeks as the effort to save the Valith's homeworld gained momentum. Ships from across the galaxy continued arriving, bringing supplies, technology, and volunteers eager to help. The underground complex buzzed with activity as scientists, engineers, and diplomats worked side by side with the Valith. Despite the progress, tensions lingered. Not everyone trusted humanity's intentions, or the Valith themselves. Sarah Mitchell remained at the heart of it all, acting as a bridge between the two groups. Her knowledge of the Valith's language had grown significantly, allowing her to communicate more effectively. She spent hours translating messages, explaining procedures, and reassuring both sides that cooperation was possible. But even she couldn't ignore the growing unease among some of the newcomers. One afternoon, as Sarah worked in the main chamber, a group of scavengers arrived unexpectedly. Their ship landed near the ruins, its battered hull marked with symbols that identified them as mercenaries. These were individuals who thrived on exploiting chaos and disaster, often disregarding morality for profit. They had heard about the beacon's activation and saw an opportunity to plunder whatever valuable technology they could find. Rachel Bennett spotted them first, her sharp eyes catching movement near the entrance. "We've got company," she warned, tightening her grip on her weapon. "And they don't look friendly." Sarah joined Rachel near the edge of the chamber, peering out at the scavengers as they approached. There were 6 of them, armed and uninvited. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face and a confident swagger, stepped forward. "This place belongs to no one now," he declared, his voice loud and mocking. "We're here to take what we can." "You're not welcome here," Rachel shot back, stepping in front of Sarah protectively. "Leave before things get ugly." The scavenger smirked, glancing at his companions. "Oh, I think they already have." The situation escalated quickly. The scavengers pushed past Rachel and Sarah, heading straight for the beacon. The Valith reacted immediately, forming a protective barrier around the device. Their movements were calm but deliberate, exuding a quiet strength that made the intruders hesitate for a moment. "Get out of our way," the leader growled, raising his weapon, "or we'll make you regret it." Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "You don't understand what this is. This beacon is their only hope. If you destroy it, you'll doom an entire species," the scavenger sneered. "Not my problem. Now move." Before anyone could react, Daniel Carter appeared beside Sarah holding a scanner. "If you touch that beacon, you'll trigger another collapse. You won't survive it, and neither will any of us." The scavenger hesitated, glancing at the unstable ceiling and walls. For a moment, it seemed like reason might prevail. But then one of his men fired a warning shot, shattering part of a nearby machine. Sparks flew, and the ground trembled violently. Panic spread through the chamber. As debris rained down, the Valith moved swiftly, shielding the humans and guiding them toward safer areas. Sarah shouted instructions, urging everyone to stay calm and stick together. Rachel led the security team into position, her weapon trained on the scavengers. "This isn't over," the leader yelled, retreating slightly. "We'll be back." As the scavengers fled, the tremors worsened. Cracks spread across the ceiling, and chunks of rock began falling dangerously close to the beacon. The Valith acted without hesitation, using their own bodies to stabilize the structure. Several of them braced against collapsing beams, sacrificing themselves to keep the chamber intact. "No!" Sarah cried, rushing toward them. "Stop! You'll kill yourselves!" But the Valith ignored her pleas, their determination unwavering. It was clear they valued the beacon above all else, even their own lives. Daniel grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back. "There's nothing we can do. We have to get out of here." Reluctantly, Sarah allowed herself to be led away. The team evacuated quickly, dodging falling debris and helping the injured along the way. By the time they reached the surface, the underground complex was on the verge of total collapse. Back aboard the shuttle, Sarah stared out the window at the ruins below. Tears streamed down her face as she thought about the Valith who had stayed behind. "They gave everything," she whispered. "Everything." Captain Hayes placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They didn't give up, and neither will we." The next few days were chaotic. The scavengers returned multiple times, attempting to raid the ruins despite the instability. Each time, Rachel and her security team repelled them, but the constant attacks took a toll on everyone. Supplies ran low, tempers flared, and morale plummeted. Amid the chaos, Sarah refused to lose hope. She rallied the remaining volunteers, reminding them why they were there. "The Valeth trusted us," she said during a meeting. "They sacrificed themselves to protect the beacon and us. We owe it to them to finish what we started." Her words reignited a spark of determination among the crew. Working together, they devised a plan to fortify the area and protect the beacon. Emily Dawson reprogrammed the ship's drones to patrol the perimeter, while Daniel used his knowledge of alien biology to create makeshift barriers from materials found on the planet. Slowly, they transformed the ruins into a defensible position. When the scavengers attacked again, they were met with fierce resistance. Rachel led the charge, her leadership inspiring the others to fight back. During one particularly intense skirmish, she risked her life to disable a scavenger bomb planted near the beacon. Her quick thinking saved countless lives, but cost her dearly. As the dust settled, Sarah found Rachel lying amidst the rubble, her suit damaged and her breathing labored. Kneeling beside her, Sarah held her hand tightly. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice breaking. Rachel managed a weak smile. "Someone had to. Besides, someone has to look out for you." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she realized the gravity of Rachel's sacrifice. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." With Rachel gone, the weight of responsibility fell even heavier on Sarah's shoulders. But she wasn't alone. The Valeth who had survived emerged from hiding, joining forces with the humans to defend their world. Together they fought off the scavengers in a final, decisive battle. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Alliance held firm, driven by a shared sense of purpose. When the last scavenger retreated, the battlefield fell silent. Exhausted but victorious, the survivors gathered around the beacon, which still pulsed faintly, despite the destruction surrounding it. The Valeth bowed their heads in gratitude, their actions speaking louder than words ever could. Sarah looked at the faces around her, human and alien alike, and felt a surge of pride. Against all odds, they had succeeded. The beacon remained active, calling out to the galaxy for help. Reinforcements would arrive soon, bringing the resources needed to heal the planet and restore the Valeth's future. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting light on the battered landscape, Sarah whispered a promise to herself and to the Valeth. "We won't give up. Not now. Not ever." End of document. Document. Part 8 of Everyone Gave Up on the Alien Race Except Humanity. The final days on the Valeth's homeworld were a mix of exhaustion and triumph. The beacon, though battered and dim, continued to send its signal across the galaxy. Ships arrived daily bringing reinforcements, supplies, and hope. The scavengers had been driven away for good, their attempts to exploit the ruins ending in failure. Now the focus shifted to rebuilding, not just the planet but trust between species. Sarah Mitchell stood near the beacon, watching as engineers worked tirelessly to stabilize it. The device was old, its mechanisms worn from centuries of neglect, but it still functioned thanks to the sacrifices made by the Valeth and the humans who had defended it. Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude every time she looked at it, knowing that it represented more than just technology. It symbolized resilience, unity, and the power of compassion. The Valeth themselves were changing. Once wary and withdrawn, they now interacted openly with the newcomers. They allowed scientists to study their biology, sharing insights into their culture and history through gestures and sounds. Sarah spent hours translating these exchanges, piecing together fragments of their story. What she learned filled her with both sorrow and admiration. The Valeth's world had once been vibrant and thriving, home to sprawling cities and advanced civilizations. But a catastrophic event, a war or perhaps an environmental disaster, had devastated their ecosystem. Over generations they had struggled to survive, their numbers dwindling as their bodies succumbed to genetic damage caused by prolonged exposure to radiation. Despite their suffering, they had never given up. They had built the beacon, hoping someone, somewhere, would hear their plea for help. Daniel Carter shared Sarah's awe. As he analyzed biological samples, he discovered that the Valith's genetic condition was reversible with proper medical intervention. If we can repair their DNA and restore their environment, they'll have a real chance at recovery, he explained during one of their meetings. It won't happen overnight, but it's possible. Captain Hayes listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. Then let's make it happen. We've come this far. We're not stopping now. The effort to heal the planet began in earnest. Teams of environmental specialists worked to cleanse the atmosphere of toxic gases, using advanced filtration systems brought by the volunteers. Engineers repaired damaged structures, reinforcing them against future collapses. Medical teams set up temporary clinics, treating injured Valith and administering treatments designed to stabilize their genetics. Sarah played a crucial role in coordinating these efforts. Her ability to communicate with the Valith earned her their trust, allowing her to act as a liaison between the two groups. She ensured that resources were distributed fairly and that everyone understood the goals of the mission. It was exhausting work, but she found strength in the growing bond between humanity and the Valith. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah joined Daniel and Emily Dawson near the beacon. They sat quietly, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of calm, a moment to reflect on how far they had come. "We did it," Emily said softly, breaking the silence. "Against all odds, we actually did it." Daniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the beacon. "And it's not just us. Look at how many people came together to help. If this doesn't prove that cooperation is possible, I don't know what will." Sarah smiled faintly, her gaze drifting to the Valith gathered nearby. They moved slowly, their movements less strained than before. Some even approached the humans, offering small gifts crafted from metal and stone. It was their way of saying, "Thank you," a gesture that touched everyone deeply. "It's not over yet," Sarah reminded them gently. "There's still so much work to do, but I think we've shown them and ourselves that we're capable of more than we ever imagined." Back aboard the SS Horizon, Captain Hayes addressed the crew during a final briefing. His voice was steady but filled with emotion as he spoke. "When we first arrived here, most of the galaxy had already written off the Valith. They saw them as too strange, too dangerous, or simply not worth the effort. But we refused to give up. And, because of that, we've achieved something extraordinary." He paused, looking at each member of the team. "This mission wasn't just about saving a dying species. It was about proving that humanity's greatest strength lies in its willingness to reach out, to listen, to understand, and to help. That's what sets us apart, that's what makes us human." The room erupted in applause, though it was tinged with sadness. Many of the crew knew this would be their last night on the Valith's world. The SS Horizon would depart in the morning, leaving behind a team of volunteers to continue the work. Sarah, Daniel, and Emily had volunteered to stay longer, determined to see the mission through to the end. As the ship prepared for departure, Sarah took one last walk through the ruins. The scars of battle were still visible, but signs of renewal were everywhere. Plants began sprouting in areas where the air was clearing, and the Valith moved with renewed energy, their spirits lifted by the promise of a brighter future. Standing beneath the beacon, Sarah whispered a silent vow. "We'll keep fighting for you, for all of us." Months later, reports from the Valith's homeworld reached Earth. The planet was slowly healing, its atmosphere becoming breathable once again. The Valith population was stabilizing, their genetic damage reversing thanks to ongoing medical treatments. News of their recovery spread across the galaxy, inspiring other species to reconsider their prejudices and fears. Humanity's role in the rescue mission became legendary, celebrated as a testament to perseverance and compassion. Sarah Mitchell's name was mentioned often, alongside those of her teammates. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope could prevail when people chose to stand together. As Sarah watched the repaired beacon shine brightly against the twilight sky, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The Valith had been given a second chance, and so had humanity. Together they had forged a new beginning, one built on trust, understanding, and the belief that no one should be left behind. End of document.